Josh Swanson, Vogel Law Firm.
Hey, those levels look pretty good. Let me check to make sure that there's no static now. Hey, everything looks good. Thank you for joining us here as we conclude 2020, looking at 2021. Wanted to bring Josh Swanson in because, my Google alerts and all of a sudden your name pops up and you're involved in another court case, or you're getting asked for your opinion on a court case involving mineral rights. And I didn't really, you know how I am. I don't really buy into a lot of fake news and different news. I just go right to the source. So we just bring Josh Swanson in to talk about that. So how you doing today?
I can tell you the wind's raging outside my living room window. They're definitely not fake today, but it's good to be on with you here before Christmas, talking oil and gas.
Well, let's talk about that mineral rights case. Then I want to ask your opinion on the North Face thing as well. Just actually from an attorney standpoint, I have a question from you, free legal advice. Sorry to impromptu that on you, but let's talk a little bit about that mineral case happening out in the Bakken out in western North Dakota. I thought it was all done and your clients were going to get paid. And is that the case, or is there like a hiccup now, or what's happening?
Yes, it's in another new year approaching, another year that this saga continues, and we ended up filing a new lawsuit in federal court in November because the state refused to recognize one of our clients' interests that have been in his family since Garrison Dam and Lake Sakakawea. The surface was acquired by the U.S. back in the 1950s, and even with the two favorable decisions in our Wilkinson case and the North Dakota Supreme Court's decision in the Storm case, the state still persists, which is frustrating, disappointing, mind-boggling. I mean, pick your adjective to describe it. So that fight continues, and in this one, we've actually filed it in federal court. A couple of reasons for that. But most recently, the state requested an extension to file their answer, which was granted, and that's, I think, kind of a pro forma thing. The judge has discretion to do that. The state wanted a 3-week extension with the holidays coming up, and we had no objection to it. And even if we did, it wouldn't have mattered because the judge can do what he wants to do with his calendar. So that's ongoing. But then in the Wilkinson one, which a lot of your listeners are well familiar with, the operator released the funds that were in suspense, which we're very appreciative of. But we do have several claims remaining, including those against the state of North Dakota for our clients' attorney's fees, which have accumulated. Now they're north of $500,000, which sounds like a pretty big number, and it is a big number. It's an absolutely very big number. But you think about the fact that we're coming up on the 7th year anniversary when those clients walked into our office and told us about the situation. And we actually took a look at all the filings in the case and everything else. And, the plaintiffs, the Wilkinson family, have had 2 attorneys representing them in this case. The state and the other defendants have had 17. There's been almost 2,000 pages of briefing filed and 550 docket entries. So it's a situation where when the North Dakota Supreme Court issued its decision earlier this fall, we were hopeful that the state would be agreeable to resolving this, but unfortunately that doesn't appear to be the case. So we'll have to push forward with our claim for damages against the state, including attorney's fees.
This might sound like a really dumb question here, but and I may have asked you this before in a different way, but are there some sort of federal precedents that are going to be set that's going to trigger into different states, or the way that the federal lease ban is coming in? It's a problem from North Dakota because once you get underground, you start talking about different leases once you start doing the 2 miles horizontal drilling and that sort of thing. So it does become a little bit complicated. Is that at all in play here with this? Is that why they're so resistant to doing what most people think is just the right thing?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, Jason. And it's tough to speak to the motivations of the state at this point. And I think a big part of it is they're just dug in on their position, despite the fact they've had the North Dakota Supreme Court rule against them several times on it, and attorney's fees are mandatory. I mean, the case law on that is very, very clear from the North Dakota Supreme Court. When the government tries to take your property, even if they're successful in taking it and under an eminent domain, they still have to provide the impacted landowner with their attorney's fees. I mean, the law is crystal clear on that. So there's really no good outcome for the state here. I mean, the only thing they're doing is running up the bill that they're ultimately going to have to pay under North Dakota law, and we feel very confident and very strong in our position on that. And their motivations outside that, it's really perplexing, because all they're doing at this point is generating unfavorable case law for them. And at a certain point, you have to ask, when is it going to stop? And our hope is that they'll come to the table here and realize that. And we've told them ad nauseum. I would venture to guess probably at least on 12 to 20 occasions. It seems several times a year we're reaching out to them and say, let's get this done. Let's figure it out. Let's sit down in a room and figure this out. And they don't respond, which is perhaps the most frustrating thing. It's a state agency funded by taxpayers like you and me and all of your listeners, and we can't even get a response from them. They know that we're not a scorched earth, fire and brimstone kind of operation. We want to try to get this worked out and an outcome where our clients can move on with their lives and we can have some certainty. And here we are 4 years after legislation was passed and it's being applied in a way that's unconstitutional. So we have that in federal court now, and the state refuses to get Wilkinson done despite all the decisions. So, it's something I suppose, not to be a cynic, but we've grown accustomed to it, and we'll keep plodding along and we'll keep fighting, and one of these days we'll finally have some resolution to it. It's just disappointing, not just for mineral owners and not just for my clients, but I know I've been on your program here many times talking about the uncertainty and the difficulty it creates for operators who are just trying to do the right thing, and they want certainty and resolution as much as mineral owners do, but you have the state that is really preventing that. So we have to finish this out in front of the state district court in Williston and then on to the Supreme Court for a third time in this case. And if we have to keep pushing forward with our lawsuit, the EEE Minerals case in federal court, which, as I mentioned, we filed and served in November, that's what we're going to do. So,
what's the deadline tomorrow? December 24th, high water mark. Is that affiliated with this case at all?
Yeah, it is, and that's a really good question. So under the statute 61-33.1,
which everybody knows exactly what you're talking about there. Right? They got that written on their refrigerator, don't they? That number? What was that number again?
The 61-33.1. Man, I tell you what, brother. I think sometimes I see that number in my sleep, and numbers like that, and
you're like
2134.
You're like Hurley from Lost. Those numbers just keep coming.
It's like that scene on either Rain Man or The Hangover where Zach Galifianakis, his character is in the casino, and all the algebra and the tangent and cosine stuff is flashing in front of his face, and sometimes I feel like it, and it's like that old Yogi Bear deja vu all over again. But those I think those numbers will be with me until I'm old and gray, and hopefully having beers on a lake deck somewhere. But under the statute, it requires that 6 months from when KLJ released their acreage adjustments, which would have been back on June 25th here, coming up on the 6-month deadline, that the operators in state, if there was no other sort of title dispute, so if there's no issues with did grandma and grandpa convey this, was there a probate done, things like that, requires the funds to be released, and we've started to see that. Like I said, our clients in Wilkinson, Equinor released payments here in late November, and I do want to say that Jody Smith, who's a land commissioner, I've had some really good conversations with her, and she deserves credit. I think she's being as transparent as she can be, and I think she's trying to do the right thing. I think what the certain elements in the state government are doing are making her job awfully tough, and she got put in a really tough position. I mean, she inherited a mess and inherited this lawsuit, and so I do have empathy for her. But, the law is what the law is. And when certain elements inside the state government are refusing to abide by it, that has repercussions and consequences where, we've got to take actions to protect our clients' rights. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that because, she's a party to the lawsuit in federal court, but this fall, she's always been available for a phone call. She's always responded to emails. And my hope is that, the folks in the state government that are really making her job very difficult, do the right thing so this can get resolved. But those checks should be out here by December 25th is how I read the statute. So I think we're gonna, for better or worse, potentially see more litigation out of this. And this is a situation where, what I do for fun on nights after my son goes to bed, I was looking through a memo we had put together that had a lot of the legislative history on 2134 and comments and testimony and whatnot from senators, then Senator Armstrong, Senator Unruh, Martinson, Kaiser, a lot of guys that were behind mineral owners on this. And you see a lot of the things we'd warned them about back in 2017 coming to fruition now, 2 legislative sessions later. And at a certain point, to be frank and be blunt, I really would hope that the legislature puts the boot in the ass of those in state government that keep dragging this thing out, because we've got a lot of smart people in North Dakota. We've got a lot of smart people. We have a lot of good people at the Capitol building in Bismarck. And I think someone just needs to step up and be pretty forceful, like I had said. So we'll see where those payments go. I will say that, from my perspective as a litigator who's been heavily involved in this, if payments aren't made to our clients by December 25th, so long as the state is, and operators too, are willing to communicate with us and have an open line of dialogue, that sure helps prevent filing a lawsuit. And I respect the position, like I said, that operators are in, and I know there are challenges, and when they're willing to have a dialogue with us, that helps keep them out of court. But the problems happen when the state stonewalls and obstructs and tells us to take a hike, or is dug in their position. And there are some operators that are better than others. There are some that'll pick up the phone, and I won't go into names because I don't want to call them out or get them in trouble. But, there's a couple operators I can pick up the phone and call their in-house counsel, and they're responsive, and we talk, and that helps avoid lawsuits. And then you have some operators where you got a VP of land or whoever else that tells me to go to hell. And, telling someone who's been in this fight for a long time on behalf of mineral owners to do something like that, that's probably not going to lead to real amicable results. So my hope, Jason, I know a lot of your listeners and a lot of folks in western North Dakota and really all across the country that own mineral rights in the Bakken have been impacted by this, and I'm tired of seeing them. There's a lot of them that are aging, and it gets really sad for me to, and I know I've told you this before. I've had 3 clients die in this case, that they were never able to enjoy their family's legacy, the money that was theirs, that the state got tied up. And that makes me fight even harder, because it just makes me mad as hell that you got folks where, like me, a 5th generation North Dakotan, we've had some of the same land in our family going back to about the turn of the century up in Benson County. And when you have a government that mucks that up and tries to claim it, you're darn right that frustrates me. And I really hope that we can get this figured out and get it done, because, I've got plenty of other work to do. And the last thing that I want to do is spend, another year and a half, 2 years in state court or federal court, because the state won't make this right. And I think the end of the day, like the legislators I just mentioned, looking back through their legislative testimony and comments in 2017, they said they just want to make it right. And I hope that's something where maybe we can make some progress on finally getting this across the finish line in 2021. And then you and I can find some other stuff to talk about.
There's plenty to talk about, but I just want to make sure I got the Professor Plum in the conservatory with the candlestick correct here. So this lawsuit, the Wilkinson's State of North Dakota School Board Land Trust, and I know I butchered it, but I got enough keywords in there, so I think people are following me on this. That's been going on for about 10 years, right? 10 plus years, that lawsuit?
Yeah, but they had started with another attorney prior to us, but
Sure.
we really amped up the fire in 2014. But yeah, they've been going at this the better part of a decade now.
Okay. And in that time, people have graduated college, went and gone to college, which the people have had to pay for. And like you mentioned, there's been people who have passed on and died. Okay. And so there, at the end of the day, the North Dakota Supreme Court ruled in favor of you and your clients, the mineral owners, not the state of North Dakota, correct?
Correct. Yeah, twice. They've ruled for us twice now, and then you can tack on the Sorum case too, where the Supreme Court said that under the Flood Control Act of 1944, which is part of our other lawsuit now in federal court, that the state doesn't have an interest in anything outside of the historic river channel. So that's spot on.
So tomorrow, by the way, we're recording this on December 23rd, and on December 24th, which is tomorrow, the state is required to release some funds to those individuals. And I'm looking, and they have till June 24th through 2022, depending on when some certain things were filed and et cetera, is my guess from taking a look at this kind of recap. So my guess is that there's supposed to be some funds released tomorrow, December 24th, and it made it sound like your earlier comments there is. Are you expecting they're not going to, or are you expecting they are going to?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the operator, because I know, in Wilkinson's Equinor, formerly Statoil, they've released funds. So we certainly appreciate that, but they did that last month, and I've heard that other folks have started getting checks too. But
okay,
I know that I've got a lot of clients that are impacted by this, where I've sent letters to the state and to the operators, cases that aren't in litigation. We don't start by just filing a lawsuit. That's not my style. I don't think you get really good results doing that. I think it's important to try to have a dialogue and work things out first before running to court and filing a lawsuit. But we've sent out, probably 15 to 20 letters for clients, and a lot of them haven't been paid yet, and hopefully I'll get an email later today saying, great news, we get paid. I suspect that's probably not going to be the case, that, sometime in early January after Christmas and the New Year's, we're going to have to evaluate next steps and have some discussions with operators about, where things stand. And like I said, if the operators, if they're willing to have a discussion with us, and if they shoot straight on it, we're not going to drag them into federal court and say, hey, judge, they're in violation of the statute. You should order them to release payment. I mean, we understand there's some moving parts here, and we're willing to work with them. But yeah, the statute, there's some timelines that were put in place, and the acreage adjustments from KLJ have been out for 6 months, and part of the issue with those acreage adjustments, and I know we've talked about this before, there's about 10,000 acres that, like the Wilkinson property, the state has never had an interest in that KLJ survey, which, the state has paid, I think, in excess of $1 million for now. That gives 10,000 acres to the state that the state's never had an interest in. And that's part of our claims in the federal lawsuit. So, we'll see. There are, back to your original point there, you get a lawyer talking, especially a couple of days before Christmas when he's sitting at home, and I suppose we go on and ramble. But yeah, there's timelines in the statute, and I don't think that all the funds are going to be released between now and tomorrow. So I think we'll be having some conversations with the state and some operators in early 2021 here to see where things stand.
Well, that's why I wanted to break it down, because I thought I was reading the tea leaves right on this, which is you can fight the man, King George, the state, for 10 years and win twice in the state Supreme Court, and they still are going to do whatever they want.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what's so frustrating about it, because there's not just the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court issued its 2 decisions in Wilkinson and its decision in Sorum, and the legislature passed the legislation. The governor signed it, trying to do the right thing. But then you get an attorney with the state that goes rogue and just decides that they're going to do what they want, and there's got to be accountability at a certain point. There has to be accountability, and someone on that land board or someone in that Capitol building has to take the bull by the horns and say, enough. We gotta stop putting these families through it. And my clients, they had, like I said, their money released by Equinor, but at the same time, they've racked up $500,000 in lawyer fees, and they carried the banner, and they fought this fight for everybody else, and now we're fighting to make them whole, because what's the justice and what's the fairness? And after being vindicated twice by the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court says the state has no interest in their property, they've had to pay $500,000 to have that fight. That's not something that I enjoy doing. I'd much rather the state had their act together and stopped this stuff a few years ago, and we wouldn't be having to have these discussions. So that's a big part of Wilkinson now going forward is, we're gonna fight until we fall down to do everything in our power to make sure that family's made whole, and the state is held accountable for their attorney's fees. And when you look at the sheer numbers on it, like the number of filings that I mentioned, the number of attorneys involved, the number of defendants on the other side, the fact that we've taken this to the Supreme Court twice and the state persists. I mean, really, the only thing the state is doing now by dragging this out is giving us is racking up the bill on attorney's fees that we're going to go after in court. So, we'll see where this ends up. But yeah, that's an important I think distinction to make on the operators and the release of funds and how the statute works, and how it's impacted not just my clients but thousands of mineral owners.
Josh Swanson, Vogel Law. We're talking about the Wilkinson case out in North Dakota with the minerals under Lake Sakakawea. Army Corps of Engineers involvement as well back in the 1960s, a couple Supreme Court decisions later, and they're still fighting it, and the mineral owners have certificates from the Army Corps of Engineers, a couple Supreme Court decisions in their favor, and the mineral owners are still fighting and fighting and fighting. So it's one of those examples that really gets used for a long time because it's a David versus Goliath, and Goliath continues to just not go down,
It's interesting you mentioned that story. I've actually got here. History Channel's running a marathon on their miniseries, The Bible, and that was just on about an hour and a half ago. That episode where David took his slingshot and stoned and hurled it at Goliath and knocked Goliath on the head. And we'll keep firing stones as long as we have to, man. If that's what it takes, we'll put the stone in our slingshots, and we're glad to take on Goliath or anybody else, because it's a fight worth having, and we're proud to represent these mineral owners, and it's a fight we're willing to keep going. If they want to keep fighting it, they think we're going to go away. That's just not going to happen.
Now, you do business outside of North Dakota too, right? You've anywhere in the nation?
Yeah, it's an interesting, from a legal sense, I'm only licensed in North Dakota and Minnesota, and I'm licensed in some federal courts. So I can practice in the District of North Dakota, those two states, the 8th Circuit. I have clients that are all across the nation, but I can't, unless I pro hoc in or associate with another attorney. I can represent people, let's say, from Colorado, Georgia, North Carolina, who have property interests in North Dakota, but I can't go file a lawsuit in those states.
Sure. And, North Dakota, 97% private. So there's ownership all over the United States. And obviously, that's like a lot like Texas too. Same thing.
Yeah.
If just wanted to take a couple minutes and ask your opinion, your legal opinion, and I'm going to make sure I put out the word opinion because I don't think you're like a finance attorney or you're involved in that sort of law. So I'm not sure what your expertise or qualification is towards this type of thing. But North Face refused some business with an oil and gas company. They had, I think it was 400 coat order, something like that. And they cited for their company policy and lumped them in with tobacco and pornography and drugs, alcohol, that sort of thing, lumped them in the same kind of that sin tax category, if you will, and said due to their policies and standards, community standards, though they cannot do business with oil and gas companies. And, of course, the hypocrisy came out because a lot of the North Face products are made out of the oil and gas products. Yeah, and not to mention how do you transport them places, and
I'm sure that they're on. I know I've had some North Face, or not necessarily North Face stuff, but we get a lot of stuff delivered through Amazon, and that doesn't come here on and not to knock any form of transportation, but it's it's a jet fueled with jet fuel that brings a lot of their products all over the country. So I think there is quite a bit of hypocrisy in what they're doing.
Well, and then you've got they've got a subsidiary company called Bulwark, which is fire resistant clothing. So not only
Which gets
is
sold a lot in the I know where you're going with that. That's sold all over. You go to any gas station in western North Dakota or any oil and gas play, and that stuff's lining the shelves and flying off because workers absolutely need it for their safety.
I know, and I was talking to the president of Liberty Oil just about a half hour ago, Ron Gusick, and I said I'm not sure how many firefighters or farmers are buying FR clothing, but I'm pretty sure all the welders are in the oil and gas camp. So I can't imagine that, by doing what I call, and this is why I wanted to get your legal mind, I guess, is I call this rank prejudice. This to me, and I had a politician say this to me, this is like when that baker didn't serve that couple.
The same-sex couple.
Yeah, it's very similar to that, which is just a rank prejudice. And so it's almost different to look at it like that from one side of it. And then the other side I wanted to get your reaction on is I think they're a public company. I'm pretty sure of it. I looked yesterday and it appeared to be because they had the NASDAQ numbers or the stockhold numbers. And if you're a public company and you're turning down a substantial amount of business and also putting a lot of risk to your other company, that seems to me a little bit risky and advantageous during these times when bailouts and all this other stuff is going on. Like, why are you refusing business? Just from that standpoint. So are there any legal things involved that need to be talked about that I'm missing in this whole thing? I guess. I don't know, man. It's weird.
Yeah, what's interesting is, you talk about, I don't have a finance background, but actually, I don't know that I'd go so far to say that I'm this, some sort of constitutional scholar, but I would say I'm a student of the Constitution, and I actually taught constitutional law at Concordia across the river in Moorhead for a semester. So I'm very passionate about that and do a lot of homework and reading on it. And there's different, it's more of, I think, a constitutional issue where the law sets up protected classes where you can't discriminate against somebody based on, race, religion, gender. There's different levels of scrutiny. There's what's called a strict scrutiny. There's an intermediate level of review between a rational standard, rational review, a strict scrutiny, and how the courts look at it. And in this situation, if you're a protected class and there's a history of discrimination there, so you talk about your race, your religion, ethnicity, those different class, and they're called classes under the law. That's why I'm using the term a protected class. That's a legal term. That there are protections there, but in this situation, I'm not aware of any, and I don't know if any lawsuits will result out of this. I think it's probably more of a business decision that the company's making, where they've decided that whether it's tobacco, oil and gas, etc., that they're going to refuse to sell products. So I don't know that the oil and gas industry has any recourse to go after North Face, but I think a couple things from my perspective. One, it's a bad business decision. I mean, especially now with this economy, you're refusing to sell product to a certain industry. And I think there is some hypocrisy, like we talked about, where you're using fossil fuels to transport your products around the world. And I can tell you what, Jason, when we were emailing this morning, the executives at North Face, I doubt they're flying hot air balloons to get to different meetings across the globe. They're hopping on G5s and private jets that are fueled with jet fuel. Where do they get that jet fuel? From oil and gas plays. And now they've decided that because they want to take a stand or have some sort of image, they're not going to sell products to folks in the industry, which, I mean, you take a look at, and I'm all for, and all of the above energy policies. Just want to make that clear. But at the same time, where does the majority of our energy come from? You take a look at what, as far as jobs and the economy, what oil and gas does and what it has done. So for a company like North Face to take that position that they're not going to sell, I think it's wrong. It might be legal, but just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's not wrong or foolhardy. So I have a tough time with companies doing things like that. But it's on the other hand, it's their business if they want to make that decision. I'm sure the folks in oil and gas who have powering a lot of economies throughout the country, whether in the Bakken, the Eagle Ford, or Marcellus, creating all those jobs. They can go to somebody else, and I'm sure Under Armour, or I know there's a few outfits in North Dakota here in Fargo in our backyard that make apparel that would be glad to sell to them. So the short answer to your question after my my long running monologue there is that from a legal standpoint, they're probably entirely within their rights to do it. But, from the perspective of, is it good business? I don't think so, but someone there decided it is. And you hate to see, I'd also say, you hate to see companies like that trying to bolster their image. And what is it about at the end of the day? North Face isn't doing this, I don't think, because there's some altruistic kumbaya company that wants to give back. I think what they're doing is saying, hey, we can get a lot of mileage out of this, and we can sell more quotes by saying, hey, we don't do business with the oil and gas industry. So folks who are, anti-oil and gas are going to say, well, son of a gun, let's go buy more North Face stuff. So I think they're just suckering a group of folks into buying more of their jackets at the expense of somebody else, because they've had their accountants and their whoever makes the decisions there, their bean counters, have run the math, and they've decided that from a business perspective, they think they have opportunity to make a bunch of money if they can advertise that and pitch that. So if they start running commercials or doing ads or direct emails and Facebook, stuff like that, saying, hey, we're divesting from fossil fuels and not making products for them, buy our coats, that's probably going to cost some people to buy their coats. So I don't like it. I think it's bad when American business discriminates again. I mean, there are some situations where, obviously you don't want to sell any. I hate to say sell weapons to terrorists, but that's not what we're talking about here. I just think it's what it really is anti-American. It's anti-American when one company, particularly a publicly traded company, decides that they're not going to sell products to an industry because they want to try to bolster their image with it. So that would be my take on it. For what it's worth.
I think part of it too is when there are a number of bailouts that are happening. I don't know if they got any bailout money. I have absolutely no idea. But this is just from a symbolic standpoint where when we're starting to, bail out billions and billions of dollars, the public does feel a little bit like they got a say in something now.
Yeah.
Either through, forms like this or through their, elected officials. Yeah. And when this VF Corporation is the parent company of North Face and Bulwark and everything else like that. They haven't set themselves up for the not finger pointing. Let's put it this way, because last year they bought 53,000 square feet outside of Denver for a private jet hangar so the executives could fly in and out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that right there, okay, well, thank you for Mr. Hypocrisy. But the second part that's a little bit concerning to me is just this morning when I was trying to find the story to email to you so you could take a look at it before this interview, the number one story with North Face today is their partnership with Gucci. So they partnered with Gucci and they launched a new website to Asia. And my first thought was, okay, How did oil and gas rank below China on human rights? Okay, this is getting a little bit out of hand now. So
it's always maybe not 9 times out of 10, but how many times do you hear that adage? Follow the money, and they're doing it because I think they've probably determined they can sell more coats and pullovers and everything else if they take that position. And what I would say, companies like North Face or really any company of that size, particularly publicly traded, it's not like they're have cash reserves in their cash. I mean, they've got good cash flow, obviously, but they have financing, they have lenders, they have credit lines, they work with big national banks to get money to finance things like their hangars and expansions and launching this thing with Gucci. And I think if I were them, I'd probably be a little pissed off too that this particular if I were industry, I'd be upset that this company that can get loans, etc., and have no issues with that, can decide that they're going to discriminate against us. So, I don't know that legally North Face can't do it, but I can understand the frustration where, they're getting financing from whoever or wherever for their expansions and their projects, which, good for them. If their business is growing, that's fantastic. Anytime a business is growing, but, to me, I think we're on the same page. It just doesn't pass the smell test, particularly when they're, launching products into places not known for having a real strong human rights record. And I think that just speaks to the hypocrisy, just like building a new hangar and flying their jets everywhere does. And just like, their products that they're shipping over to Asia, I'm guessing they're putting those on a cargo ship or a boat to cross the Pacific or Atlantic. I don't know logistically what they're, how they're doing that, but, they're either flying them over there or they're putting them on a big ship. And, what's powering those big ships and those big planes sure as hell isn't helium or, we know what's powering it. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But, I think it's, it's anti-American. I think it's just flat out anti-American.
Here's the part that bothers me is that if I'm to put my journalist hat on, and I don't even have to follow the money because there's no money to follow. They rejected it. So if I'm to put my journalist hat on, it is going to sound like a conspiracy hat. And that's the part that is so frustrating because for somebody to reject business and to basically, commit professional suicide to another one of your another one of your companies that's doing pretty good because the oil and gas industry has been doing very well. Okay, so to do that is very peculiar. It's almost like you're going to get bailed out. I think, no matter what, no matter how you do, the government's going to bail you out because, hey, we're North Face. Everybody knows about us. We're like Twinkies. Twinkies can't go bankrupt. Everybody loves Twinkies. Let's bring them back. I mean, it's almost like that.
I would suspect what they're doing. I think it's a flat out business calculation where, if you can make more money doing X than doing Y, they're going to do X. And I think and obviously I don't have any inside baseball on this, but I would suspect that, the reason they're doing it is because they've determined that if they can, kick the oil and gas industry and take a shot against them from an image standpoint, even if it's going to take a hit on their, flame retardant and protective clothing, they're going to more than make up for it elsewhere. So that I would guess there's probably a lot of that going on because there's, I think a company like North Face, they don't make those decisions. And to your point, I think they don't make those decisions in a vacuum. So I really can't speak with any certainty as to what motivates them, but I suspect that, given the fact that they are a large business and are in the business of making money, that it was just a flat out business decision. So, which is disappointing. It's disappointing too, because I think that, in America to treat one industry like that to score some points, they're free to do it. It's their business. If they want to, their board decides they want to do it. I guess that's their decision. We'll buy coats elsewhere, but it's disappointing that, you got a company like that makes a really good product that's decided to take those steps. So
it's interesting. Somebody earlier this week we were talking, and they mentioned that they thought this exact same thing, that this was a calculated move, that the backlash, they used the oil and gas industry basically for the backlash in order to spark support from the environmentalists to go buy more North Face stuff. And then in conjunction now with the launch of the Asian website, that momentum is just going to keep going and going. And the bulwark part doesn't matter because the oil and gas industry is a results-based business. So as long as they're providing XYZ price, the oil and gas industry is probably going to continue to buy from them regardless because they need to make their numbers. And they have a regulation that they have to wear the fire-resistant clothing for safety. And that's another part, too. That's what this is, that the oil and gas industry is a life-saving business, okay? Meaning, a lot like how agriculture was for a long time. Agriculture was a very dangerous business with rollovers and machine equipment. And
it still is. It still is. Agriculture still is a very dangerous business.
Yeah, so I mean, it's you don't have a lot of time to get caught up in these little platitude like arguments. You're just so worried about living, and so that was the other part of it was that they're going to have to keep buying the FR clothing anyway. So it's not even going to impact bulwark at all. So when I heard that, I went, that's almost Machiavellian brilliant. It's just so good because anyway, so it's interesting you brought that up too in a roundabout sort of way. That is probably a calculated move, and they're ahead of us.
Yeah, that's the lawyer in me there. We'll get there. We might not always be on a straight line, but we usually try to get to the destination.
Well, all right. In conclusion, good sir, they just benched Carson Wentz in football. Of course, you host the. What's the name of the podcast again?
So we got Heard It Here with Swanee on 740 The Fan in Fargo, and then we've got the Bison Illustrated podcast and Thundering Herdcast that we do on Apple iTunes. So we got a couple platforms for the Bison talk.
So Carson Wentz, of course, was the big NDSU Bison of this generation to go Philadelphia Eagles. Just got benched, and Jalen Hurts looks like he's not going anywhere soon. Looks very good there. But the reason I bring that up is to, if you want to talk about any NDSU football stuff, you certainly can. But I took a look at my fantasy football team today, and I think I only have one player, Tom Brady. Oh, Tyreek Hill and Tom Brady are the only two players starting on my roster that were originally on my team when I started this year. That's how many moves we've had to do this year. It's been a wild fantasy football year.
Yeah, and I just at Vogel, we got a work league with 10 teams, and I just lost in our league semifinals in the playoffs. And I've got Tyreek Hill, but I'm with you, man. I had Nick Chubb, and I had to weather the storm from him getting hurt. I had Dak Prescott as my quarterback, and was able to pick up Herbert off waivers. But yeah, it's been one of those years where a lot of guys going down. But with Carson, it's he's a guy who's going to land on his feet. I don't think that'll probably end up being long-term in Philadelphia. I think they'll end up sticking with Hurts and trying to get rid of him with as limited cap damage as possible. But, in Carson, I think he would be the first one to tell you he needed to play better this year, and he's disappointed in his performance. But, I don't care if you're Tom Brady, Carson Wentz, Joe Montana, or even Pat Mahomes. If your offensive line, if you're starting, 12 different offensive lines in 13 games, that's a problem. And if you're a quarterback and you're getting beat to hell and don't have time to throw the ball, and your receivers are either dropping balls or not getting open, that's football, I guess. The quarterback, if you win, you're going to get a lot of the credit. If you lose, you're going to take a lot of the blame. So I think that the Eagles in general are, they got a lot of holes, and Carson, unfortunately, is taking the brunt of a lot of criticism. And I think the other part of it is when you have a background and a story like Carson, you come from a place like North Dakota State and Bismarck, North Dakota, it's the quintessential kind of American thing. You have the big rise, you get to the top of the mountain, and then when you fall, there's an element out there that like to see the hero or the successful person, like to see him take a tumble and come back down to earth. And I think that's what we're seeing from a lot of the folks at ESPN and NFL Network and other outlets covering the NFL. Is I think perversely a lot of them are getting a little bit of taking probably too much joy than they should in Carson having a tough year. But I'll tell you what, Jason, Carson Wentz is a competitor. He's a guy that works his butt off. I think, I don't think he's going to stay in Philly. I think he's going to end up somewhere else. And I think he's going to have a long NFL career and a successful career. And, he's a guy that's just going to use this to motivate him. And in North Dakota, up in North Dakota, there's a ton of Eagle stuff everywhere. Even a guy like me who's a lifelong Vikings fan, I got a couple Carson jerseys in my closet and an Eagles hoodie that, for the record, I have not worn since that NFC title game where the Vikings lost to them a couple of years ago. But, folks in North Dakota will have no qualms about dumping their Eagle stuff. And who knows, maybe, I know you got some listeners in the Rocky Mountains there. Carson Wentz's next jersey could be a Denver Broncos jersey. So we'll see.
I never thought of the Broncos. My first thought was the Patriots, actually.
Or Indianapolis. His former offensive coordinator, Frank Reich, who was the OC the year Carson had those really good years there and was taking him to the Super Bowl before he got hurt in week 13 or 14 versus the Rams, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, whenever it was. Frank Reich, his offensive coordinator, is now the head coach in Indianapolis, and they've got Phillip Rivers, who's toward the latter stages of his career, and they don't have anyone behind him who's a franchise kind of guy. So I would think that that's what I'm reading a lot, that a landing spot might be Indianapolis, but in the league, who knows where one guy is going to end up. If there's an opportunity and the dollars make sense, then that's what'll end up working out. But as a guy who's watched Carson since he was a junior at North Dakota State starting, he's going to be fine. He'll land on his feet, and I know a lot of us back home, we're really cheering for him and want him to have some redemption here.
Well, yeah, and sometimes this in the world of athletics, when the team's trust gets shattered, it's really it's really hard to pick up the pieces when so many different areas are, and that's why actually the Jalen Hurts thing worked out great, because he came in as an outsider. Really, he wasn't a part of that day-to-day offense at all, and he came in and just added a different perspective for really everybody, and it worked out, which is good. And because of the signing of Wentz in the offseason, I actually think it's going to work out best for everybody because of that. Just the way it worked out is it kind of, forces the hand of one or the other, which is good, which is really good for quarterbacks. The worst thing is to put a starting quarterback in a backup role and to keep a starting quarterback as a backup. You know what I mean by that?
Bingo. Yeah, and that's Carson is such a competitor where he's been, there's clips of him here I saw yesterday where he's coaching up Jalen Hurts on the sideline, looking at the Surface Pro with him, going over coverages and schooling him up. But Carson, at the end of the day, he is a fierce competitor, and he's a starting quarterback. He's not a backup, and I think that's going to drive it. Where you're spot on. He's not a guy, even with the money he made signing his deal in the summer of 2019. That's not a guy that's going to be happy or content to sit in the backup role.
No, and that's why I actually think, a team can float a second to a fourth round pick because of the money, actually. And Philly might have to take it because of the money. And it'll work out better for both people that way, because then it'll be just more about getting Carson on a team that is going to benefit, and also getting a decent pick to Philadelphia where they need a lot of slots filled. They really do. They really need a lot of slots filled.
And for like in any business, whether it's NFL, the industry like we're talking about, it's not healthy for your organization if you can't keep both of them. And the reason you can't keep both of them is you keep Hurts and you bench him, then you have a split locker room. You're going to have Carson guys, you're going to have Jalen Hurts guys. And I think part of the problem this year was Carson was looking over his shoulder the whole time, because where's the trust in an organization where you spend a second round draft pick on a quarterback instead of getting an offensive lineman or another wide receiver that can help you win? You're taking a quarterback who is a young guy in the second round. So what's the message to Carson? That you're expendable, we don't believe in you. So I think that might have rattled him a little bit. But you keep Carson, you got that issue where if Hurts doesn't play well, he's looking over his shoulder at Carson, and you have the dynamics in the locker room. And if you start Carson, he's looking over his shoulder. So I think from an organizational standpoint, you can't keep both of them. You got to get rid of one, and I think what they'll end up doing, they'll try to get as much for Carson as they can get, and whether that's a second, third, or fourth round pick, and them taking some salary, they'll do that. And I think Carson Wentz will probably be wearing a different jersey next year.
Yeah, I do too. And boy, I could talk all day about this and point out, the Stephon Diggs Jefferson trade that worked out fantastic for both sides. So there are recent examples of moving superstars for draft picks in order to, satisfy just the players, really. And it's not the players' attitude. And I'm not trying to make Diggs out to a bad guy, because Diggs just wanted to go where there was opportunity. And right now, Wentz wants to go where there's opportunity. And that's all it is. So anyway, but how can people access those podcasts and the radio shows and everything like that? Give yourself a plug. We kept you way too long. I hope you're not going to bill us for this.
No, and I've got the timing. The timing is good because my 14-month-old is just waking up, and I'm watching him on the video, and he's just standing in his crib, so I got to get him. But BisonIllustrated.com has all of our content, or they can check me out on Twitter at Swanny8. We post all of our stuff. That's SWANY, the number 8. But I appreciate talking with you. It's always a good conversation.